So, so I want to give an example. This is an example in terms of how do we establish, what is mental health for us. And we see that there was this caption that I was able to capture that I can't ran across. You see this picture of these young brothers, these young children. When they put their feet in a circle, it kind of looks like the bottom of a tree. So we see the roots are being laid. But most importantly, how do these children operate? We talk about the way African children operate. So this story about this anthropologist, this European, who came and began to wanted to test African children. He's operating from a European mindset. And he wants to talk about this idea of competitiveness, to compete. So when you start getting young children to compete, you start getting them to fight individually. But these young children, as it reads in here, he placed a bowl of fruit underneath a tree, and he told them the first one who gets to the tree will eat the fruit. And then when he told the children to run, guess what the children did? They all stood up, grabbed each other's hand, and they all ran together. Because when one child can get the fruit and share it with others, then we all eat. And so he asked that question. He asked the question, why didn't you guys run alone? And as the children said, how can we be happy when others are sad? To me, that's the embodiment of what an African positive mental health looks like. We need to understand that what is the philosophical, cultural, deep understanding of how we see our existence. One thing we need to recognize and understand is this. In European psychology, everything is based on individualism. Individualism, the ideas of what it means to be individualistic, right? We start talking about survival of the fittest. That's a Charles Darwin term. That's a European term. And in that term, it begins to talk about how the individual is to shape and master his community or the environment around him. Whereas when we start speaking from an African-centered perspective, it's all about the collective. It's about the group. So it's not a survival of the fittest, but a survival of the group. So from my very essence, I am because you are, and since you are, therefore I am. My existence is tied into or is embodied with my relationship or connection with you as the other person. So we need to recognize that even from the very essence of how we talk about the individual, one is a collective we, and one is an individualized that I think, therefore I am. That's Descartes. That's what they say. I think, therefore, that's European philosophy at its best. Whereas the African philosophy at its best is the fact that what I just said, I am because you are, and since you are, therefore I am. Therefore, already we see that those two concepts in understanding the individual is antithetical to each other. They're in opposite positions of each other. So an African needs to recognize that his being or psychology starts from that of we, whereas the European is always speaking of that of I. And so that's why it's important. Whenever there's war and strife, you're going to have groups of people coming together to protect what? Their collective or individual interests. We're talking about the way in which people function from a day-to-day perspective. In other words, when I speak to someone about relating to and connecting with them, I'm relating to them from a spirit or a soulful place. In other words, we recognize that someone is telling us the truth or someone's being real with us by the way we feel in our connection and our response. That's not a war response. That's not a warring nature. So what we're talking about, what you're speaking of, is that, yes, when there is strife, when there is war, when white folks feel that their collective interest or their individual interest is being seized upon by people who don't look like them, they will band together. But then when you get embedded into the system that white folks live under, which is what I could say that we're in America, you'll begin to see all kinds of challenges. I don't want to pray in schools. I don't want to pledge to the allegiance. I don't want to have this particular type of service provided to me because of what? For various reasons. My individual right to say so, to do so, and to be so. That's what these founding fathers have done, have talked about these things. Individual alienable rights that they talk about. Now, when you go to other countries and cultures, you begin to see that individual alienable rights are vastly different. In other words, that you begin to recognize that my existence within this community, whether it's an African tribe in Ghana or Nigeria, is the fact that it's embodied by the communal collective understanding that I cannot walk into a village and just say, I choose to be by myself, individual and alone. So we're talking about vastly different experiences of relating, talking about when people come together and for what reason and forces. I'm speaking at the very deep level understanding of psyche, how the psychology works. Europeans operate from that perspective. Yeah, they would go to war against people of color in a collective force, as you saw what's happening here in the States on January 6th. Those white folks got together to fight against what? The fact that they believe that other people, whether you're African, Hispanic, Asian, whether other people were encroaching upon their rights. So they collectively got together because they want to see what? All these people of color in government. What happened in Haiti? When we had the first real African revolution for independence, the white folks did not sit back and say, we understand your fight with us. They just became more belligerent and more indignant in their position of saying, we will never help Haiti again. Because of why? When they created that revolution, they did to the Europeans what the Europeans have always done to us, which is to take them out. So we need to see that, something in the recesses of their mind, their pineal gland is not as advanced as us. I'm not saying we have to operate out of peace and love to all those who provide or to all those who pose a threat to us. I'm not saying that one bit. We need warriors. We still need warriors who's going to fight. We need leaders who's going to discern the difference